if you're going and looking as a ground up developer of let's just say retail to
Hmm.
begin with, is one thing you might look at is, housing starts. Where are people starting to build housing? So if you're
Okay.
looking at, like north of Montreal, saying like, how, like what cities are allowing, densification, building, to look at those for strategic retail sites. You'll meet with the city saying what's zoned, what's not. I mean, that wasn't directly my responsibility at that time, but it was something that I learned a lot about of, smaller towns of someone's got to build a small shopping center in a small
Yeah.
town. It's got to make sense. There's got to be the population. And then what you have to do afterwards is, well, you've got to convince on the landlord side, you've got to convince those retailers to come. You mentioned a
Yeah.
Pharmaprix, not a client of mine, but someone I've worked with in the past is, hey, does this population, can this population support a pharmacy or a
Yeah.
grocery store, and working with those.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. And today I am very proud and quite honored. I've been actually chasing him for over a year to get him on the podcast. My friend Aidan Bourke. How are you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
Axel, thanks for having me. I'm doing very, very well. A pleasure to be on.
All right. Well, look, I'll share a little bit more about how we know each other and how we met and where we're at. But before I do, I just want to remind everyone, thank you so much for your continued support. It's now the beginning of 2023. We're going to be off to a great year for pretty much our third season now. I'm quite proud of that. And end of last year, I just launched the Patreon program. For those who want to join the Inner Circle, we have events. There's a bunch of perks. We do calls. I can help you on deals and stuff like that. So check out the show notes. Everything is included in there. And I look forward to seeing you. And when you sign up, I'll have a quick chat with you. So, Aidan, first of all, I'm very happy to have you. Aidan and I went to the same school a couple of years apart, and we met at an alumni event and realized that we were both in real estate and doing quite different things. And I've been wanting to share your experience because you've been quite successful, and I look up to you on the commercial side. I think you've done something great. So first of all, how did you get involved into real estate?
It's kind of a funny story, actually. And again, thanks, Axel. Thanks for having me on again. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to everyone, especially you. I kind of stumbled into real estate. It was at a point in, I guess, your mid 20s, and I was looking to what I was going to do next. I've been working in the legal field for a while, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, listen, I know you're looking for something new. I have an opportunity." It was a friend who worked in commercial real estate for more of an institutional landlord type of urban office. He said, "Listen, I have an opportunity for you. It fits your profile. Would you be interested?" And I'd never really considered real estate as a career in my life. It was sort of something that I was just like, oh, like the whole thing is, oh, people in real estate buy and sell houses, when really it's a lot more than that. And so I started out, that way, basically being referred for, a job. It went great. And I started working on the commercial side of real estate for a Quebec-based developer
Mhm.
that basically did ground up strip centers.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was regional outside of the island of Montreal, so North Shore, South Shore, and Vaudreuil area. And I was doing leasing for them, as well as doing a little bit of the development site selection sort of thing. So getting an idea for, one, how do you buy land? How do you develop? How do you, plan strip centers and malls and all that, and what goes into that whole process. So working with
Yeah.
municipalities uh, and and planning. So that's sort of how I kind of fell and stumbled into it and realized it was something that I was very passionate about. It's a very fun industry, and that's sort of how it kind of happened out of nowhere, to be honest.
Yeah, and this is sometimes like how the best opportunities are created. And I forgot to mention in the introduction, and I'm sorry about that. You're now director of client services for Oberfeld Snowcap, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about it because it sounds like it is a fancy title, but like, what does that mean? What do you do? And then I'd love to kind of fill in the gap between like where you're at now and where you started and all the things that happened because it's a learning process.
Absolutely. So you mentioned where I'm at right now, Oberfeld Snowcap. We are a brokerage agency. We're based out of Montreal. We're a national agency, and we basically what I do is I represent mostly retail tenants
Okay.
in their needs. So it's on the brokerage side, representing retail tenants and dealing with their strategic plans for going into either enclosed shopping malls or strip centers, and working with them. A lot of them are sort of national tenants that you've heard about a lot, and we've been working with them since store 0 to store 50 to 100, in some cases to 1500. And so what I do is we do sort of negotiation, site selection, and strategizing. It's really a third party consultant role where we
Okay.
advise our clients and guide them through the process of again, starting from store 0 or store 1 or store 5, to national and North American growth. So we do a
Okay.
lot of business across Canada as well as the United States now,
Hmm.
and a lot of that happens in enclosed malls.
Okay. And so I know I always like to put a name and to make it an example. Like, you
Mhm.
know, I don't know if they're your client. I'm just gonna pick a chain that everybody knows
Sure.
here. And so let's say it's a Pharmaprix,
Mhm.
and they want to open some location. Like they would come to you and say, find me 3 sites. Like how does it work?
Well, I think they may. A lot of it is, and it depends on the client. Again, it could be it could be a mom and pop saying, "Listen, I have 3 stores, in Montreal, and we're doing well. We want to look at expansion. Is where should we go? What should we focus on? Who is our client? What are our demographics? With leveraging us and using us and our information about whether it's national across Canada. What are the best malls? What are the best locations in malls? What are how do we bring and add value and success to our clients? Is that sort
Okay.
of what we do? Is we try to roadmap with them of how can we add to your success.
Hmm.
I think in real estate, a lot of people talk about the road to success. There's often some stumbling blocks and some learning. Is how do we optimize that for you? How do we add
Yeah.
value to your business? Make sure that you're making the right decisions
Hmm.
at the right time. And a lot of that comes from our knowledge of the market, and also our relationships with some of the bigger institutional landlords across Canada. I mean, in terms of
Of
enclosed
course.
malls or whatever, there's obviously
Yeah.
regional malls, there's regional landlords, but there are large national institutional landlords that we deal with. That quite frankly, we know the assets, and someone from Montreal or someone from Toronto may not know smaller markets or more regional markets, or if they're looking to go to the United States from Canada, is how can we, I guess, game plan and help them execute on their
Hmm.
strategic goals.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
the thing is that now that I understand a little bit more what you do, like it totally makes sense because the number of actual owners for that type of shopping malls and centers is actually really a handful when you think about it. So
Correct.
you're kind of always dealing with the same companies in trying to make those connections between a landlord and a commercial tenant.
That's right. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. And so you described at the beginning in your first position, like how you got exposed to, buying land and working with the municipalities and stuff. And
Mhm.
as you were mentioning all this, like it just made me realize again, like how valuable that experience is for anything that you're going to do into real estate afterwards, because it really helps you understand how it works from the ground up. And so can we go back and like some of that first position and like maybe situations that you've had or examples of like, oh my God, learning experience, like light bulb goes on. I didn't know this is the way it worked.
I mean, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of one particular example, but a lot of it for me, again, entering into real estate, you're not really sure how the sausage is made. For example, it's like, well,
Yeah.
you go into a town and there's buildings, some are commercial, some are industrial, some are residential. How does that process work of um, you know working with municipalities, the CCUs, the conseils, all those types of things of like who are you dealing with and how does it work? That was something that was completely out
Well,
of mind. And for
yeah.
for most people starting out in real estate, it certainly is. It's just like buildings appear and then they're there, and you can either buy them, sell them, lease them, or all that sort of stuff. So that was a really interesting thing. But one of the most interesting things that I learned there was, I think, more site selection,
Okay.
and starting in that sense of uh, if you're going and looking as a ground up developer, of let's just say retail to
Hmm.
begin with is one thing you might look at is, housing starts. Where are people starting to build housing? So if you're
Okay.
looking at, like north of Montreal, saying like, how like what cities are allowing, densification, building, to look at those for strategic retail sites. You'll meet with the city saying what's zoned, what's not. I mean, that wasn't directly my responsibility at that time, but it was something that I learned a lot about of, smaller towns of someone's got to build a small shopping center in a small
Yeah.
town. It's got to make sense. There's got to be the population. And then what you have to do afterwards is, well, you've got to convince on the landlord side, you've got to convince those retailers to come. You mentioned a
Yeah.
farmer pre, not a client of mine, but someone I worked with in the past is, hey, does this can this population support a pharmacy or a
Yeah.
grocery store, and working with those. So that was really interesting, is developing those relationships with some of the, those types of tenants.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Like site selection is specifically for that very important choice that you're going to make in building a small or medium or large shopping center is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely crucial. And as you say, like most people just think about it as like, oh, they just build something there, but they forget that there's like 3 years or 5 years of work ahead of it to select and choose everything and negotiate with the city. And it's that
Mm-hmm.
process, as you said, that's very foreign to people.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing. You look at that and you're like, well, you have to look at egresses and ingresses to the shopping center, working with the
What
municipality.
does that mean? What does
So
that mean?
base entrances, it's a fancy
Okay.
word for entrances. It's like if you have a mall, you have to have turnoffs. You have to maybe work with the city for stoplights, and all that sort of stuff to manage traffic. There's also,
Hmm.
things like for a retail shopping center, things like parking density, you
Hmm.
know, uh, zoning is always an issue too, is if you want to change zoning, it always has to go through, the municipality for sure. So that was sort of my introduction to that whole, um, yeah, I guess retail development. I didn't always stay in retail. I mean, I've obviously done, more than that, but it's always very interesting to me, because there's deals, there's leases, but that's always an interesting part too, is the development process too, which is always
Hmm.
fascinating. Yeah.
And now, now in your current role, like going back to the example of a mom and pop shop that's doing well and they want to add some locations, so you would help them with site selection, but
Mhm.
then do you also walk them through like the lease negotiation and the work and the renovation that needs to be done? Like how far do you go into your service?
A really good question. I think lease negotiation, to a certain extent, yes. There's a caveat that I'm not a lawyer, so
Hmm.
there's certain things that I could advise upon. Most of it is financial and or option based, rather than like, what are your renewal options? What are the rates? Are there fair market rates? Things that are more, that are less on the legal side, but more on the strategic side of advising people. Things like, like relocation rights, or basically just trying to protect, your clients' interests in terms of expansion, and mostly financial, to be quite
Hmm.
frank. Yeah.
Hmm. I have another question for you. Like with everything that, during the pandemic, there's been a great like population flight outflow of cities. People wanted to
Mhm.
move to the countryside, and like the second tier, the third tier cities like had a lot of growth.
Yes.
Are you seeing now that trend kind of reverse from retailers? And I just want to pick an example. Let's think of a city in the Eastern Township, let's say
Mhm.
Granby, that had
Yep.
a lot of growth. Are retailers now still wanting to come into this market, or are they feeling a bit of a pullback because there isn't as much growth and now they feel it's not as interesting? Like, what are you seeing from your side on the commercial?
What we're seeing on the retail side, with
Hmm.
regards to, things like traffic and sales, and who's doing well and where, is really interesting. So there's obviously been, like, a flight to, as you mentioned, people moving from urban areas, moving to ex-urban areas, or suburban areas. Um, on the retail side, the people that are doing successful are actually, the more centrally located malls and retail areas. I think what you see a lot of is, people go to shop less, but when they go out to shop, they shop more. This was
More.
specifically true in the pandemic, and people would go to, sort of, we call them the AAA malls, the super regional malls. I'll give you a Montreal example, like just to pick one off the top of my head, like a Fairview Point Claire, or an Anjou, or a Laval. These types of enclosed shopping centers saw, much quicker rebounds, much quicker sale rebounds and higher traffic volumes than the smaller, sort of enclosed malls. As a general rule, there's obviously exceptions to all of that, but I think you saw a lot of luxury did really well over the pandemic, and a lot of AAA malls, bounced back in terms of their traffic and their sales more than smaller malls. So I think you saw people going in, it may have been, whereas in the past it was maybe a family going to a mall on the weekend. Now it would be mom or dad or, whatever, going in and shopping for the whole family. So maybe spending a little bit more, but not going as a whole group as much. So we saw that, and there's obviously been a change in the past 6 months too, as the world returns to whatever our new normal is going to be. Those trends continue to evolve and change. So it's my crystal ball is no better than anyone else's,
but do you, from what you're seeing, is the traffic and attendance back to pre-pandemic levels?
For the most part, we're back to pre-pandemic levels, and sales. We just came through the Christmas season, and people are either at pre-pandemic levels or exceeding pre-pandemic levels.
Oh wow!
Which is good. It's good news, So good news for everyone.
Yeah. And then going back in those in that, continuing in that direction, do you see any trends right now that, like, over the last 6 months, like, there's been dramatic shifts in terms of interest rates and in terms of financing, and that might affect more maybe the just investors in general, maybe, for you, your commercial clients are investors as well. Like, what's been happening? Do you still see as much expansion, and how are your clients kind of hedging that financial risk?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I have a ton of information to give you about how they're planning, because a lot of, like, what our clients are looking at is a function of sales, right? How have sales been? We just came off the Christmas period. We'll see. I think, as we're talking right now, there's in the States, there's going to be chat of, what are the next interest rate bumps, and all that sort of stuff. So I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but I think it really depends on the type of tenant and type of retail tenants. I won't speak to any of my specific clients, but if you're looking at, food and beverage, people are, concerned about the cost of labor and the cost of food. And that affects, you and I in terms of when we go to the grocery store, but it also affects a food and beverage operator, whereas, their operating costs has increased dramatically as a result of the increase in cost of food. So it's, you may have noticed, you go to the, you go to the food court at a mall, or you go to a quick service restaurant and you're saying, hey, listen, I'm paying $20 for, a pad thai where it used to have been 16 or 15 bucks. And it's where can you get something for under $20? So it affects sort of the macro, but it's tough for me to say exactly, how it would affect, the clients and the increase in interest rates right now.
But then, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, hearing you say that, like, then as a consequence, has some of your commercial clients wanting to, for example, decrease the size of their locations?
We haven't seen that. No, I think it's more just there's, and this I think happens with, not just retail, but it is being very careful about site selection. If you have a renewal coming up, or you're doing a new deal, generally a retailer will operate within a specific amount of square footage to optimize their sales. They might look at a change in rates rather than changing how they operate their business. So we haven't seen a decrease in footprint really for retail, but it's more just it's picking the right site is more important, or rationalizing their footprints. It's more of a closure or a reopening rather than a changing of the footprint.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, because with the example that we picked, it was a client coming to you wanting to find some locations. You also work the other way around, and I'll just give you like a very real picture. Is that I'm doing a new construction project in Saint-Jérôme. We have 5,500 square feet of commercial space, and we're going to have to find a tenant. Could I come to you and be like, hey, find me someone to put in there?
We do have that as a service in our company. It's landlord representation. Absolutely. We have it's not particularly my team, but we do have a team within our office that specializes in that. We obviously have relationships with retail clients. There's a bit of a wall between, the people that work directly with the tenants and the landlord reps.
Yeah.
for a number of very good reasons. But to answer your question, yes, we do that as a service within our company, and something that I've done in the past. But it's sort of a bit of there has to be a separation of church and state, for example, there.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. And now, so how long have you been in this position? What do you see? Where do you want to go from there?
So I actually just joined Oberfeld Snowcap about 3 months ago.
Oh, okay.
So we can talk a little bit what I was doing before then,
Yeah.
which is also interesting, and I love to talk about. But where do I see myself going? I mean, uh, or we're going right now. I think a lot of the growth that we're seeing right now is U.S. based,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. A lot of Canadian retailers moving into the U.S. trying to expand their business. Obviously, it's a very large market.
Huge.
12 to 15 times the Canadian market. So it's trying to open doors and opportunities for them. And as I mentioned, picking strategic locations for them within that market. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really reassuring for your company because, as you said, like that's I don't want to say endless, nothing is, but it's
Right.
there is so much growth potential.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mhm. Okay, and then going back, as you said, to the before there,
Mm-hmm.
because I think you went to another company in between. Can you kind of walk us through what was that like?
Yeah. So I'll give you just a little bit of background. I started obviously in retail development, then moved to obviously on the landlord side of, I went into the institutional landlord side, and worked for a real estate investment trust. So
Okay.
publicly traded real estate investment trust that specialized in office space for what we called knowledge-based organizations.
Hmm.
So distinctive urban office space for knowledge-based organizations, which was basically, a lot of converted loft office space for tech companies. So I
Okay.
did leasing for a large national REIT for, I guess, about 3.5 years,
Hmm.
which was really interesting because it was office space and it was, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Um,
What was that like?
it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was
Yeah.
a lot of learning. I mean, I think everyone had to look at things a little bit differently over the past couple of years, and not to talk too much about that because who wants to talk about the pandemic all the time? But
Yeah.
it was a new way to look at at transactions,
Hmm.
understanding that no one knew really what was coming ahead of us. So different industries were affected much differently. Work from home was obviously a very, very big factor, and something that had to inform your decisions about how you were going to do a lease transaction. And it was one
Hmm.
of those things where you're working with a multinational tech company, and they're saying, I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. But if you have really high quality, AAA office space, that you've invested, let's say $200 to $300 a square foot in build outs over the past couple of years, do you just let it go? So it's one of those questions there. You
Yeah.
have to have
Yeah.
these real deep dives in terms of you know what is you have the conversation with the tenant, and go through the negotiation. And there's a lot of questions that people asked, and you didn't get a lot of answers right away. So it was
No.
obviously a very interesting waters to navigate, but it was a lot of
And,
fun.
and nowadays, or up to 3 months ago when you were there, like was demand for office space coming back, or did you see it as kind of flat? Because a lot of companies have been downsizing their office. I mean, it's no surprise.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of it would depend on the particular tenants. I think one of the
Hmm.
larger trends that came, especially as I was just exiting that sphere, was what people call flight to quality. So I'll try to like rationalize it. Like if I'm an office owner and I have, let's just say, 50% of my staff in 3 to 4 days a week,
Hmm.
as than I did before pre-pandemic, is and I want my staff to be happy, be back in the office. What do I want to provide them? The main answer is a central location with amenities, with lots of natural lights, with a gym or all this sort of thing. So a lot of companies are saying, if my lease is coming to term on the office side, and I have a chance to either renegotiate or move, is what do I want to do? I'll downsize a little bit. I'll go to a premium asset, I might be paying less. Let's just say I downsize by 30% and I'll pay, 15% more. I'm making up sort of numbers here, but
Yeah,
pay
yeah, yeah.
15% more in rent, but I'll provide a better experience you know, to my employees. Well,
For
it's
employees.
probably a win because you still
Yeah,
want to have a lot of people still want to have a physical footprint. You got to
yeah.
have a place to go into, to have a culture, to have you know, to have a
A
real
meeting, a
experience.
meeting location. This is how companies transfer culture to employees. They have to come
Yeah.
in,
And people
basically.
call it like that water cooler talk is, you're at the water cooler,
Exactly.
you exchange
Yeah,
ideas, you exchange information,
yeah.
and that's how a lot of information is disseminated through companies. People call it
Hmm.
tribal knowledge, the
Yeah.
tribal information of like,
Hmm.
not everyone writes everything down at a company.
No.
Believe it or not, even if you're a Google of the world, and everything is written down, a lot of the information is just part of the culture that's there of how
Yeah.
we operate and how we do business. So that was one of the main trends that we saw. That
Hmm.
being said, I think like some of the lower end offices, like if it were you and I, like conversationally, like I wouldn't want to go back to a really dark, dingy cubicle with no light. It
No.
just doesn't, it wouldn't be appealing to anyone. So yeah, I'd rather be at
No.
home and have my coffee and pet my
Yeah.
dog and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was one of the trends we saw as people looking at, some of the lower end office space being a little bit more, that was maybe a little bit distressed, needed a lot of
Hmm.
capex, all that sort of stuff,
Hmm.
was maybe a little bit,
Less
tough,
desirable.
less desirable, and maybe
Yeah.
tougher to lease.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. And
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way, that they would want to downsize their footprint, but increase kind of the rating and the quality, even though it costs more. And it totally makes sense because employee retainment is now such an important point
Yeah.
for companies, so that they have to provide a better location, a better service, better connected, better amenities, and so on and so forth. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, it's also one of those things you mentioned it, and like I think like the labor market was really interesting over the past 2 3 years, where unemployment was historically low. People had to compete for talent, and that was part of people's reactions. How do I
Hmm.
how do I attract,
Yeah,
retain, and grow my talent base, because it's
yeah.
the world is competitive, in nature. So
With these conversations, it always makes me realize like how much there is in real estate, and we're all focused on our thing. And
yeah.
all I do is like some residential and now some new construction, and just talking to you now, and it's like, whoa, the mind expansion of all the commercial and the retail and all the stuff that I rarely think about, to be very honest. So I'm really grateful to have had this conversation with you today.
Yeah, no, listen, it's fun. I love these types of off the cuff chats about real estate, because it's one of those things. It's like how do cities operate? How do
Yeah.
people connect? Is it there's the office portion, there's the industrial portion, there's the commercial portion, there's the residential portion, and
Hmm.
a lot of factors go into uh, how they all tie in together, which is I think
Yeah.
one of my favorite parts about real
Yeah.
estate. There's
Hmm.
obviously there's making a living, which we all
Yeah.
want to do, but there's also the lower, there's layers to that onion. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
it's super super interesting. And if people would like to reach out to you and continue this conversation, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
LinkedIn is a great way. My contact information is also all on the Oberfeld Snowcap website. So, my email, my phone number, and my LinkedIn. So send me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email if you'd like to connect. Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's a great way to connect and the easiest way to go about it. And to everyone listening, this was really a fun an episode, a little bit different than what we often talk about, more on the residential side. So feel free to share it with a friend who could learn from this, and also reach out to Aidan if you have any comments, questions, and all that, or send them to me and I'll pass it on to him. Thank you for listening in today. Definitely stay tuned, and as usual, educate yourself, research your market, get into the action, and make some offers. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.